All right, if it's Friday, it is LNAW. I'm going to go right to the chase today. I got this new LNAW hat, which I'm not going to wear because I don't like these. It's a style of hat I don't like. If you want these hats, legit, it's probably good for golfing or if you're going, to juniors t-ball practice or whatever over the barbecue and all that. But it's not my style of hat. I remember in high school there would always be like, bend the brim, bend the brim. But I prefer the flat brim, and what do you call it? The square top. This is not necessarily my style, so I'm not going to wear it. But if you want one of these hats, you can have that. And then I got a bunch of, everybody's been asking me for business cards lately. I got a new stock of LNAW business cards, and I got a bunch of LNAW pens. So I'll make sure I restock myself. Pens are always go missing, but business cards, I'll make sure I always have a good supply of that. Okay, very important for people. 28 pages of notes. Last week I told you that I was going to discuss, after reading the full opinion, I was going to do an LNAW update on the SFSA, Students for Fair, or SFFA, excuse me, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and the University of North Carolina, UNC case. I did read that over the weekend. I have 28 pages of notes. It's a lot, okay? I have trouble keeping things under 15 minutes, and they say you should be, cut loose after 2 minutes if you want people to pay attention to you. And I have 28 pages of notes, so I don't know how long this is going to take, but it is been a hot day today, over 100 degrees. I was coming in from the west side. I was at the jail earlier today visiting some clients, and then I was driving in on the west side on I-40 coming down 9 Mile Hill, and you can see a lot of smoke. What do you call it? Not smoke, but it was hazy and dusty and windy, and it was cloudy earlier, so it's gonna be a little deceiving, but it is sunset now, so that's great. Okay, I'm gonna try to make this as brief. I can't get into everything here, okay? I do want to make one correction from last week. The opinion came down on Thursday. This affirmative action opinion overturning Grutter versus Bollinger, the 2003 affirmative action case, which said that race can be a factor but not the factor. Basically, this case said that race cannot be a factor at all. That came down Thursday. Friday, I was doing my LNAW, and as I was doing my LNAW, these new cases where I was about to start, these new cases came down were coming down from Supreme Court in regards to, or I was hearing about in regards to the student loans and LGBTQ. I did say in regards to student loans that it had to do with Biden. I haven't read those cases, and at that point, I didn't even know what these cases were about or anything. And I incorrectly thought that the student loan case had to do with it. Maybe it's because this case, and even though I hadn't read it at that point, has a lot to do with the word equal, and the word equal has been used hundreds of times now. So I thought it had to do with the equality of different amounts of how some people are getting certain amounts of student loans discharged and others nothing or less or whatever. But it had nothing to do with that. It actually had to do with the company known as Moela, formerly known as Navient, the student loan company. They're a significant player in the economy of Missouri, apparently. I could be wrong here, but this is what I understand it to be. They're a significant player in the economy of Missouri. So I believe this would be a Commerce Clause issue. And by Biden dismissing these loans at random, it would affect this student loan company. And that would then, in turn, affect the economy of Missouri. That's what I believe it's about. Think what you want about that. I know a lot of you probably have pretty strong opinions about that, but that is what that is all about. Okay. Now, to this. Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and the University of North Carolina, UNC, two schools that practiced eugenics. Eugenics had to do with, and this was brought up in this case by a conservative, eugenics had to do with genetic cleansing, similar to Hitler's Nazi Germany of 1944, okay? The university I went to, University of Southern California, USC, you probably heard me bring it up before. I tried not to, but I do, and I have these USC cones behind me, but it just, it fortunately, or for good or for bad, has been an important part of my life. But the University of Southern California, USC, there was a building called VKC, and there was a statue of this guy named von Kleischmann that VKC was named after. They tore down his statue, similar to when they were, here they were tearing down Wande Onyate's statue, and this was the whole time early in COVID, when a lot of these things were going on, they were tearing down these statues. He was a big proponent of eugenics. Eugenics is basically basically genetic. You're keeping people within the same race, sterilizing. He would have people sterilizing people of races that they believe were inferior to prevent reproduction or different things, and maintaining marriage and children and reproduction within certain races. Okay, so trying to create this master race. That's what eugenics was all about. My concern with affirmative action, I'm going to get into this, and I thought both sides made very good arguments. Okay, and I thought Sotomayor's 68 pages said it was long, but it was very good. And actually, halfway through this, I realized most people have probably made up their mind. They're going to they're going to just use whatever they see to frame their own arguments, right? I actually, and I hate using the word open mind because people who say open mind are probably not very open minded, but I actually, I've made my opinions clear in regards to this. I do believe it's discriminatory on its face, but after reading that opinion, I did I did kind of shift a little bit, and it was a fascinating opinion because both sides are using the same law, equal protection of the 14th Amendment. And in similar cases, whether it be Brown versus Board of Education or that 2003 case itself, in regards to affirmative action, Greta versus Bollinger. But I think there's a bigger issue here. We're trying to, these are universities and programs and already kind of an elitist system. People are going to, once you're done with college, they're going to ask you want to know where you went to school. If you go to San Diego Pacific Beach or whatever, everybody's walking around. One person will have a Northwestern hoodie, other person will have an Iowa hoodie, other person will have a USC or UCLA, or actually in San Diego you won't have as much UCLA and USC. You'll have maybe Big Ten or I don't know, some NYU or whatever, right? You'll have all of these things. So if affirmative action is about trying to replace one set of elites with another set of elites, and then you're trying to create these these programs, whether it be affirmative action or whatever, so people can get a bump up or whatever to get into these programs that are already elite. I think it shouldn't be done. I think that's a disastrous proposition. Now, and I always believed that, to me, the university system was about a trade, right? And I told you about that Angola class I took, which I respect, okay? He was a great professor. He passed away in 2017, okay? But but that class with Jonas, and these are Cold War era type of classes, regarding Jonas Savimbi and the whole, the communist faction and the American Allied faction and all that in Angola and all of that. That fascinating stuff. And back then, if you're going into diplomacy, maybe back in the 70s or 80s or 90s, whatever, although this guy, Jonas Savimbi, died maybe right around the time I was taking the class. But these kind of, they may have had a purpose, somewhat of a purpose before, but in this day and age, in 2023, if you want to put food in your table, Jonas Savimbi is not going to put food in your table, or knowing about Jonas Savimbi, okay? I would propose to you, if you really are interested in that kind of stuff, go, research that on Wikipedia, or go, study that. There's a lot of stuff, just Google it, okay? But we right now have a shortage of doctors, lawyers, age-old professions, where people just don't want to, either they feel like it's not going to be economically prosperous, they don't want to go through all the school, or they don't feel that they would make as much as they would in maybe another subject or whatever. So we have these age-old subjects where there's a shortage, and I didn't necessarily agree with Ketanji Brown Jackson. Ketanji Brown Jackson had about a 28-page dissent, I believe. I didn't agree with a lot of when she was talking about. At first, I was like, okay, you're talking about disease. Blacks have a higher rate of disease or poverty or whatever. Now, if we tie that in to equal protection issues from slavery era and stuff, maybe there's an argument. And I think Sonia Sotomayor's opinion, which was really good, went into that. But if we're just going to say that in a general stance, and then to say to discriminate based on that, I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing to do. But I thought a good point was, I don't know if it was Sotomayor or Ketanji Brown Jackson who said that Black doctors will relate or know about the diseases and the issues that involve Black patients. And I didn't think that, and they don't talk about lawyers because judges and lawyers don't like talking about other lawyers or whatever. And lawyers it's never been really, it's always been the stereotype, oh, there's too many lawyers or whatever. But now actually we're at a time where there's actually a shortage of lawyers in many parts of the country. But I do believe that lawyers, Black lawyers can often relate to Black defendants, especially when they're incarcerated, or same with Hispanic lawyers or whatever. Or Indian lawyers may be able to assist Indian lawyers, whether it be Native American or Asian Indian or whatever. So I do believe that there may be affirmative action. So it's not about the person. It's not about the person trying to get into Harvard or Yale so they can wear that hoodie around San Diego or whatever. It's about that person being able to do a profession that is necessary, and then they can maybe help save lives or do different things based on that affirmative action. So in that sense, and this is probably maybe where I've changed in the last week, I do believe that affirmative action is good. And as they would say in constitutional law world, it is narrowly tailored to a compelling governmental interest. Okay, but if all this is about, if this is just so people can get into these universities thinking, and I've been seeing this, I'm not going to name any names or any universities, but I've been seeing a lot of students who just think that they're entitled right now and can come out of college and then, oh, everybody's just going to do, their staff or whatever will do everything for them because they got this name. That's not what it's about. I mean, this is that it's only the beginning. You know, when you get out of undergrad or law school, whatever, and you start your profession, you learn a lot of what you're going to do on in your job. So it's only the beginning. So there's no entitlement or anything like that. But if all this affirmative action thing is about is being able to wear that hoodie around San Diego Pacific Beach, or saying, you know, with your alma mater on it and all of that, so you can go to the football games and be like, oh, look at me, I'm better than everybody else because I go to this big name school. Then I'm not for affirmative action. Now I'm not saying nationalize, you know, Singapore style, have a national university or just everything nationalized, but I do believe it would be beneficial if we can just focus on the professions as opposed to the name of these universities, because really that's another form of elitism, another kind of caste system. And and they talk about the caste system. I know being from India, I know the caste system well. These are the same set of kids. University people are the same set of characters as high caste people in India who talk. You got to say thank you after you come into my house, or they talk in very big elitist, colonial kind of style of talking, and they just think that they're better than everybody. It's just another form of elitism. And if that's all this is about, then I'm not for affirmative. I'm not really for anybody really getting involved in these university systems, because I think it's really a waste of time, and it's creating some BS. Okay, now there are economic issues that are stemming with blacks in this country for many generations from slavery. Whether some people will say just a straight economic compensation for that would not be good, but then if we're talking about the dealing with the university system, that creates a whole another convoluted mess. And are the universities? I mean, in this day and age, the way things are right now, I don't believe that having a university degree, regardless of how elite it is going to necessarily translate into money. What it could translate into, if you're doing the right things, is maybe helping out other people within your race, whether it be connecting with other people who are doctors or lawyers, or who are patients of doctors, or who are minority descent, or different things. But on its face, this is discriminatory, the affirmative action. I do tend to agree with that. But if there can be things that can benefit the masses in a greater way, then maybe affirmative action can be a positive. Okay, but as far as race being a factor, I understand both sides of this. I do believe that the liberal justices are looking at this from similar to the Reconstruction era, where there were certain things done in regards to housing or different things to specifically address issues of blacks assimilating into the country after slavery was abolished. Okay, but now these conservative justices will say that, well, basically, in lack of a better phrase, are saying get over it, or it's 160 years later now. Okay, and those programs were narrowly tailored at that particular time for a short amount of time to deal with that national emergency, and now we're dealing with 160 years later, and they'll also cite that 2003 case and say that this has already been basically. I mean, Kavanaugh, he had an 8-page opinion, but I thought, size doesn't matter. I mean, you can. I know people can make a 2-line analysis or 1-sentence analysis, and it would be much better than somebody can go on for days. But he was saying that there was an expiration date per that Grudder. There was no expiration date. They just say 2028. I think some of the other justices brought up 2028, but even the other justices acknowledged that the 2028 was a day where they can consider whether things have changed enough to lift this. But it was not like this drop dead date. Basically, it left it open for the justices to determine, or the court to determine, whether race has adequately been adapted, or has adequately been, I should say, normalized, or where it should be. Okay, but that's, that we're going to be going back and forth forever on. I mean, liberal justices will say no, the conservative justices will say yes, right? And then you have somebody like Clarence Thomas who will say that affirmative action is the problem in the first place, because people looked at him differently when he was finishing law school, thinking because he was black, he was, he had gotten in because of affirmative action. So then there's that argument. Okay, so this could be this never ending thing. So my whole thought process is let's wait about a year or two. Let's wait about a year or two. There are many factors. I think it was a majority opinion here. I think it was Roberts or somebody who had said that, race is not like living in a, discriminating based on race is not like discriminating on somebody based on living in a city or a suburb or because they play the violin good or not, okay? But there are several factors involved, which Sotomayor, I think the conservative justices said that, okay, we can have, the conservative justices said that you can have essays, which can explain and provide context on your race and stuff. And then Sotomayor said that's like putting lipstick on a pig. I'm not saying having essays, but I'm saying that if the argument is that blacks and other minorities may be disproportionately affected because of racial program or because of poverty or adverse issues, if you use those issues outside of race, if you don't consider race and you consider those issues such as socioeconomics and different things that can adversely affect certain minorities or another, would not be the effect of that then be to have more of these races get in, and could we have then more diversity based on this? I would then argue that based on what I talked about in that Indian Child Welfare Act, how much of this is theory versus practice? Right? I mean, this is just maybe opening up lawsuits by considering race, but is it really going to even make a difference now? I mean, if race is already only a factor and they're considering all these other factors, and these factors deal with adversity or things that may actually benefit certain minorities, such as African Americans, blacks, or Hispanics, or different, or some Asians, or whoever, if that's going to then have the effect to help them anyway in admissions, is it going to make a difference? Is by using the term race to even consider this, as Clarence Thomas is saying, creating a stereotype in and of itself beyond the college ranks, and is it basically just opening up for lawsuits so people can then say whites or maybe Asians, as it was in the case in this case, can say that they're being discriminated against? And Brown versus Board of Education, which both sides use, Brown versus Board of Education, the liberal justices will say, oh, well, the argument in Brown versus Board of Education is that everybody should have the right to go to any school that they want. Plessy versus Ferguson was saying, after slavery, was saying separate but equal. Everybody should have the equal facilities and all of this, but everybody, now any reasonable thinker will realize that was a horrible opinion. Basically, it said that, yeah, everybody should have equal facilities, but it should be separate but equal. So blacks and whites, colored people and non-colored people would have different facilities. And what ended up happening then is was a way of whites saying that blacks cannot come here and not vice versa, right? Now I'm very sensitive. Brown versus Board of Education, it says that everybody can have the right to go to the same whatever schools that they want to, and the conservative justices will say that's why there shouldn't be affirmative action, because everybody should have the same, nobody should be negatively affected to benefit another race. But then the Sotomayor and I believe it's Sotomayor to a certain extent, but Ketanji Brown Jackson would also say, because of the situation with blacks and the history of slavery and different things, that there needs to be an extra push and extra done to provide that ability to have the same schools or whatever, as was the case in Brown versus Board of Education. So there's a different interpretation of this equal protection clause. Okay, but I say let's just let's consider this in about a year or 2 years, see where things are at. But I'm thinking the 10,000 pound gorilla in the room is more than all of this, is these universities themselves. Okay, and whether they're actually it's the best. It could just be the system itself is rather elitist, and then we're just replacing one set of elites with another. And if we're giving some people a boost over others based on that, I think it would be ridiculous. Now I am sensitive to this. I understand the immigration. My parents and I heard this on the news from some on a news program. I'll admit it's not from reading it, but one Indian congressman was talking about how he wouldn't be here. He was attacking another guy who's running for president, but he was basically saying my family wouldn't be here without the Immigration Reform Act of 1965 and all of that, and that had to do with the civil rights movement. So I understand that. He's correct about that, and I am sensitive to that. I understand that, and I'm kind of an evolution of the whole civil rights movement here, at least in terms of the United States. So I understand that perspective very well, and the Civil Rights Act, 1964, and different things that really made kind of shaped where things are. But right now we have to kind of look at what is really beneficial. And as I said, I did kind of sway a little bit after reading that opinion, but I think it really should be narrowly tailored towards people who want to go into certain professions. Okay, otherwise we're just fostering this whole elitist system in regards to, we're going to give you a bump up to go to Harvard, and then you can study some bullshit thing and then go, sorry for my language, but essentially that's what it is, and then that'll disconnect you. And then this legacy thing, and this again, I knew this would open, and they discussed legacy admissions. This opened up the door for legacy admission. People are now suing the schools for, I think Harvard just had a lawsuit now dropped on them in regards to legacy admissions, saying that, okay, because your daddy or your granddaddy got into Texas, or 7 generations got into Texas or Michigan or Harvard or whatever, that's not fair, and that's discriminatory. On its face, that is. But now this brings up and this goes back to my whole argument on this university system in general. What's left, right? I mean, so what is this university system thing, right? I mean, these legacy people are descendants of whoever, the Kennedys or whatever. I don't know. It's a game for you. So if you're going into politics, or you're going into business, these are the people who give you the contacts or give you the jobs or whatever, right? Or if you're in Hollywood at USC or UCLA or whatever, right? So if you take away these legacy admission things, then maybe those guys are going to go somewhere else and they create another network, and these universities are just going to be an extension of high school, because let's face it, part of this whole university system is the networking and the connections that come from these legacy people. It's just one big kind of convoluted system. So that opens up another can of worms, and then people will say, as much as Sotomayor may say that Asians are not being discriminated and are being benefited by these programs, I mean, there are certain underrepresented minority groups, such as Vietnamese, Hmong people, and excuse me, Filipino. But in general, and of course it says these are overbroad, terms. I mean, when you're saying Asian or different things, 60% of the world's population. But when you start if you start discriminating based on these different races or different ethnicities or things of that sort, then you're gonna. It's just going to create maybe and Asians are known to be more competitive, or whatever, trying to get in to apply to these schools more. If you take out the legacy admissions and you take out affirmative action, then these schools are just going to be full of Asian students. So then that would, and maybe white students. So then the argument that Sotomayor is making, which I don't think was I'm not saying it was a disingenuous argument, but when she's saying that there was not, when certain group, like the statistics she was using, and again, both sides will use different statistics in these kind of arguments, sources or whatever, to their favor. But how legitimate these sources are, I don't know. I will assume, I could be wrong, but I will disagree with Sotomayor, and I will assume that Asians are discriminated by this process. And if you take out legacy admissions and you take out these admissions, affirmative action admissions, then you're taking out, you're basically could make the argument then that these schools could be overrun with Asian students, and then the whole purpose, the original purpose of affirmative action, they said, was not so that there could be racial quotas or more races, and races to be balanced, is really to create the free flow of ideas based on certain races. But the California schools had lifted affirmative action back in the late 90s, and there's arguments that can be made that they become more diverse. But then they will say that there's a high number of Asian students at many schools. I mean, if you go to, if you talk to Koreans in Los Angeles or wherever, somewhere in California, and you say the word Cal, I mean, they'll have goosebumps, right? I mean, that's like I mean, certain schools have created this whole like affinity with certain races, or when it comes to medical school and Indians, it's a big thing. But again, my argument would be it should not be the name of the school. I do believe that there is a compelling interest to have certain races based on what I read in this opinion, uh, whether it be doctors or and lawyers and different things. So if people are going to go specifically for those sort of programs, then yes, I'm for the affirmative action, but programs. But if it's specifically just to say that they can wear their hoodie saying Northwestern or Iowa or Indiana or Vandy or whatever, Vandy would be Vanderbilt, then yeah, I think that's defeating the purpose. Okay, but that's just my opinion. 25 minutes. Wow. Okay. Well, I could probably go on for hours, but again, I didn't really go into much of that, but there's probably more I need to discuss. But that's that for now. All right. Have a great weekend. Sorry, you dark now.